Welcome everyone to the Harry Bridges School of Labor class on May Day and its origins, its history, and we're going to be going through what the lead up to May Day, um, kind of a short history before then, and then we're going to get into the reasons uh, behind May Day, and then we're also going to discuss the uh, modern celebration of May Day. But there's one uh, quote I'd like to read real quick from Foster's American Trade Unionism, because Foster was born um, 4 or 5 years before the events in Chicago. He was born in 1881, February. And when he was a kid growing up in Philadelphia, his uh, the workers that he would work alongside, they had a memory of the events of May Day and the Haymarket uh, murders, and it was extremely vivid to Foster the effect the that May Day had on the workers, and it fueled them. He said for many years. So he says that the decade when I was a growing lad, from the middle 80s to the middle 90s, was one of active struggle by the workers. In point of militancy, it was unequaled for the next 25 years. This was the heyday of the Knights of Labor and the foundation period of the American Federation of Labor. Some of the greatest strikes in the history of the United States took place during this time. This decade of extreme working class militancy was started off by the Great 8-Hour Strike Movement of 1886, centering in Chicago, which greatly stimulated the trade unions everywhere, and which resulted in the legal lynching of its militant leaders, Parsons, Spies, Fisher, Engel, and Link. And then he says further on, I was profoundly stirred by all these great events. Especially was I uh, interested and aroused by the bitter strikes of the period. It is true that I knew of 1886 only from the older workers, but it was then still a strong tradition among them, and I eagerly absorbed it. So, and in this context, he's speaking of 1894, which was a Carmen strike in Philadelphia, and that's when he got involved in the labor struggle. So this was an extremely pivotal point in American working class history. And around the world, as soon as people heard about the events of that happened in Chicago, there were demonstrations, workers going out into the streets um, in solidarity for what happened. So we'll get into the history of it and the and why it's important, and how it's celebrated today.
So once again, this is the American origins of May Day and its modern celebrations. What we'll be learning today. First, we're going to go through an overview of the struggles for a shorter workday, which starts with the 10-hour movement that took place before the 8-hour movement. Then we'll talk about a day of revolt, which is actually 4 days, starting with May 1st, 1886, and going through into Haymarket and the next day in Milwaukee. And then we'll talk about its modern celebrations and actions. Okay, so this section is the struggles for a shorter working day. Uh, the struggle for a shorter working day is as old as the country itself. The first strike for a 10-hour day took place in 1791 in Philadelphia. The strike was taken on by the Philadelphia carpenters. Ultimately, the strike failed, but it set the seeds for a movement later on. Then moving forward, we went into 1827, and there were strikes in Boston and Philadelphia. These strikes were also taken part by the carpenters. These strikes were also unsuccessful, but in the propaganda campaign for these strikes, there was a circular put out from Boston that I'm going to be quoting here, and it goes, and I quote: "We have been too long subjected to the odious, cruel, unjust, and tyrannical system which compels the operative mechanic to exhaust his physical and mental powers. We have rights and duties to perform as American citizens and members of society, which forbid us to dispose of more than 10 hours for a day's work." And this circular would actually go on to inspire the 1835 Philadelphia General Strike. And this 1835 Philadelphia General Strike was the first successful strike for a shorter working day, with many workers in Philadelphia gaining a 10-hour working day and also securing an advance in wages. These gains, unfortunately, were short-lived as the Depression set in 1837 and lasted about 4 years until 1841. However, this would not break the movement, and the movement would continue. 10-hour laws were eventually passed in many states. The first state to adopt the 10-hour law was in 1847 with New Hampshire. 1 year later, in 1848, Pennsylvania and Maine would follow. Unfortunately, these laws had cutouts, and employers were able to get away from these 10-hour laws by forcing contracts on workers where they would have to work longer hours. The movement didn't end from there, and this movement would morph on to an 8-hour movement starting in 1963 when the Machinists and Blacksmiths Union endorsed an 8-hour day at their national convention. Ira Stewart, who was a member of the Machinists and Blacksmiths Union, developed the main ideas for the 8-hour movement. He contended, and I quote, "Labor's demands were small," meaning the 8-hour day, "because long hours gave the workers little chance to realize that they needed more. A worker who labored 14 hours a day had neither the imagination nor the energy to demand higher wages. He was so debased by excessive toil that he could think of only food and sleep." And we could see how the how the workday has morphed, but not much has changed. And here's a quote on the 8-hour movement, on the struggle for the 8-hour day. And here it is: "Out of the death of slavery, a new life at once arose. The first fruit of the Civil War was the 8 hours movement. It was the 8 hours agitation that ran with the 7-leaf boots of the locomotive from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from New England to California." Following the Machinists and Blacksmiths Union, the same year, the National Labor Union, the first national federation of unions, passed their own resolution on the 8-hour day, which reads, and I quote, "The first and great necessity of the present to free the labor of this country from capitalistic slavery is the passing of a law by which 8 hours shall be the normal working day in all states of the American Union." And 2 weeks later, the International Working Men's Association passed a revolution at their Geneva Congress on the 8-hour day. And this reads, and I quote, "As this limitation represents the general demand of the workers of the North American United States, this Congress transformed this demand into the general platform of the workers of the world." Following several years of struggle, 8 hours laws were enacted throughout the United States, starting with 6 states by 1868. All of them included loopholes that allow for contracts stipulating longer working days. Also in 1868, the federal government of the United States passed an 8-hour law. But this law in many cases, I'm sorry. This law was not very great on its own. In many cases, wages reduced with the shorter working day. Also, the United States Attorney General ruled that the 8-hour law did not apply to government contracts. In 1877, the Supreme Court of the United States, unanimously upheld this decision, eventually leading to, by the 1880s, the House Committee on Education and Labor declared the law a dead end. And with that, we're going to break for questions.
What do we see as a positive or general opinions on a 6 day work week or whatever we said for 30
Yeah,
hours?
I'd like to speak on that. About 20, 30 years ago, the communists were calling, I would say, more than that, 40 years ago, we were calling, the slogan was 30 for 40. So 6 hours a day at the end of 5 days is what? 30 hours, correct? But we were calling 30 for 40. So this is nothing new. We've been talking about this for 40 years. You're asking, what is the advantage? The advantage is that we're not asking for the boss to have forced overtime of the worker. And that's what's been going on. The worker will get enough pay so that they don't have to work 40 hours, but we'll be getting 40 hours pay, which is really not that strange because the inflation over the past 50, 60 years
60 seconds.
has changed the whole world. Thank you.
My question is, what is the advantage of asking for 8 hours or less hours in a work week, um, as opposed to higher pay or better benefits or something like that? And just to give a little context, is like I'm in a job now where I get to work 60 hours a week, and boy, it's a lot of fun. So I'm understanding the need for an 8-hour work week, but I also have a buddy who is just working 40 hours and he wishes he could be getting overtime. Shucks. And in addition to that, where I'm coming out of, you'd be lucky to get an 8-hour shift or more than 30 hours
60 seconds.
because that's how they so a lot of people wouldn't want less hours. They would just want higher pay because they need to pay the bills. And a corporation like Starbucks, they'll be like, hell yeah, you want less hours? Have 15 hours a week and you won't be able to pay any of the bills. So that's the context that I have.
You're missing
But
the whole idea. The people are missing what we're saying. We are not saying that we're not going to call for a higher wage per hour. That is not what we're talking about. The idea is to have more leisure time. That has always been the aim, to have more leisure time, but don't get a cut in pay. There are 24 hours in a day. We figure 6 hours to work, 6 hours to sleep, and 6 hours to spend doing whatever you want to do with your life. That should be acceptable, and except for someone who doesn't have a life.
60 seconds.
A person who doesn't have a life and they are married to their work, and there are people like that. You know that. They don't understand what it is to spend anything else except work. That's where they're coming from. Our job is to tell them they're not workhorses. We're not put here in order to work ourselves to death. The job is to not work yourself to death and still get an increase in pay. So it's directly connected. Thank you.
Thank you. The whole goal is 30 hours work for 40 hours pay. So you'd be getting the same pay. You'd work for 40 hours and 30 hours in a week. And I also work 12 hours a day minimum. And I would love to be able to make the money I'm making now and working less hours.
Yeah, it was, I think you answered my question of the work 30 hours for a 40 hours pay, or I was going to ask perhaps maybe also just pay raises tied to inflation to just for cost of living. Thank you.
We have COLA. Everybody knows what a COLA is. We even have COLA on our, in my union, it's connected. That means as the cost of living goes up, you also are going to go up so that you're not left behind. 3% was what's been going on for the last 30 years, 40 years. The inflation was 3% a year, and we were behind. So we were still getting the same pay, but the cost of living, food, rent, utilities going up. So that's always part of our problem, our campaign. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna move on. A day of revolt. The Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions in 1884 put out a resolution on the 8-hour day, and it read, and I quote, resolved that 8 hours shall constitute a legal day's labor from and after May 1st, 1886, and that we recommend to labor organizations throughout this district that they so direct their laws as to conform to this resolution by the time named. The Federation made several attempts to join forces with the Knights of Labor to build a coalition on establishing the 8-hour day. But the Knights of Labor was vehemently anti-strike. Knights of Labor Grandmaster Workman Terence Powderly instead called on the Knights of Labor members to write essays on the working day. And they essentially wanted these essays to be submitted to bosses, workers, the like, to educate them on the 8-hour day. Now, while national leadership of the Knights of Labor was against the campaign, many local assemblies signed on to support. Powderly issued a March circular in 1886 as the May 1st date was looming, demanding Knights of Labor assemblies to not strike. This ultimately divided the membership of the Knights of Labor. And a quick point of clarification. The Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions was the very early formation of what would end up becoming the American Federation of Labor. And the Knights of Labor was kind of like a secret society. It was essentially the National Labor Organization before the Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions.
Time is 9:30 p.m.
Moving on. While the Knights of Labor ranks were divided over the movement, the majority of the Federation members supported the strike movement. And of those that didn't, the Federation called on to aid and support the unions that did. The Federation also drafted an agreement framework for 8-hour agreements with employees, essentially early collective bargaining agreements. Strikes would only be a backup plan, meaning the plan A was to get employees to agree to these agreements for an 8-hour day, and only if they did not agree, they would go on strike. Though it was a backup plan, the unions continued agitation for a strike, and they continued and organizing just in case. And now here is a circular that was put out for the May 1st strike date to arouse support. And I quote, "Arouse ye toilers of America. Lay down your tools on May 1st, 1886. Cease your labor. Close the factories, mills, and mines for one day in the year. One day of revolt, not of rest. A day not ordained by the bragging spokesman of institutions holding the world of labor in bondage. A day on which labor makes its own laws and has the power to execute them. All without the consent or approval of those who oppress and rule. A day on which, in tremendous force, the unity of the army of toilers is arrayed against the powers that today hold sway over the destinies of the people of all nations. A day of protest against oppression and tyranny, against ignorance and war of any kind. A day on which to begin to enjoy 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will." Planning and coordination was largely led by local coalitions. This was because the Federation was not yet large enough and strong enough to have the ability to lead a national campaign on its own. Over 250,000 workers had joined the struggle by April of 1886. As pressure was mounting on employers, approximately 30,000 workers had already gained a shortening workday as many employees started to cave. Cities even started granting 8-hour days to its municipal workers. Through all this momentum, there were still many unions that did not support the 8-hour movement. One such union was the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers, the BLET, and their grand chief detested the 8-hour movement. He was quoted as saying that the 8-hour movement would mean 2 hours less work, means 2 hours more loafing about the corners, and 2 hours claiming more for drink. The Boston Carpenter Union was all in on the strike, and their rallying cry was, and I quote, that this is the working man's hour, and a frighted capital begins to understand that labor has rights which it is bound to respect, giving promise that the hour is at hand when the producer of wealth shall claim his own and freely share in the gains and honors of advanced civilization. And now here we are, a brief overview of the May Day strikes of May 1st, 1886. And there was a massive strike wave throughout the US. At least 400,000 workers went on strike for the 8-hour day. Large cities throughout the country had big turnouts, such as in New York, Baltimore, Washington, Milwaukee, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Detroit, and the largest being Chicago, which ended up being the strike's center. In addition to these large cities, there were many smaller towns and rural towns throughout the country that held significant strikes as well. Places such as Montclair, New Jersey, Duluth, Minnesota, Argentine, Kansas, South Gardiner, Maine, Mobile, Alabama, Galveston, Texas, and many others. Imagine seeing massive strike campaigns in Mobile, Alabama, and Galveston, Texas today. One notable town was Troy, New York, which is not a large town, but 5,000 workers were on strike. Many of these strikes continue past May 1st. And here's where we get to the bulk of the movement, leading into May 3rd in Chicago and May 4th. Tragedy struck on May 3rd as police opened fire on striking workers at the McCormick Harvester plant, killing 4. In response to this brutality of the police, a rally was called for the next day in Haymarket Square. This rally, what was mostly uneventful. Eventually, as the last speaker was speaking, police moved to disperse the crowd. And as police moved in to disperse the crowd, a bomb was thrown. Police opened fire. And in the chaos, 7 policemen were killed, 70 others were wounded, and at least 1 person was killed, wounding many others. Now, this number is disputed, but there is only 1 that was confirmed killed. After the events of the Haymarket, we now move on to the next day from Haymarket in Milwaukee, May 5th. Strikers have been striking for 4 days in Milwaukee. All factories were closed in Milwaukee in these 4 days, except for the North Chicago rolling mill. Striking workers marched as they had in the days before to close down the factories. As they approached the Chicago rolling mill, a single inaudible order to stop was issued by the police. When the workers continued, the police opened fire, killing 9 workers. This was a travesty, and no police were charged. Nobody was held accountable for these murders, but nearly 50 workers were charged with either riot and conspiracy or riot and unlawful assembly. Many served 6 to 9 month sentences. And with that, we'll break for questions or comments.
Yeah, with the Knights of Labor rejecting strike in favor of this, educating the bosses, what was their backup plan that, for when the bosses inevitably rejected? Did they have a backup plan, or did they just say, we got to keep on educating them until they give?
One thing with the Knights of Labor, it wasn't an exclusively labor organization. They allowed many small, shopkeepers and small owners into their ranks. So it was essentially like a mass movement, not so much as a union. So they really didn't have a backup plan.
Sounds like the perfect example of class collaborationism. Do we have any groups like that today that are exclusively like just educating the bosses?
I don't know of any organizations that are like the Knights
There
of
are
Labor today.
company unions, they still around.
Yes, company unions are around, but like the Knights of Labor, which was essentially like, I guess, a Freemasons type organization, a secret society. I don't think there's anything like that now.
Yeah, my question may have gotten answered by my question was just, why did the Knights of Labor not want to strike? I know you said there were a lot of small shopkeepers, which I suppose would be one major answer, but I mean, was there also other reasons as to why they didn't strike? Like, were they, like Tyler said, like, were they collaborating maybe with the, the capitalist class, or were they in on something, with other companies?
Well, another thing to keep in mind, this was just the national leadership that was against it. There were many local Knights of Labor assemblies that were on board and went on strike. And you'll see a lot of similar activities now where up leadership of many unions don't want to go on strike. In fact, the mass wave of teacher strikes a couple of years ago all started out as wildcat strikes. The leadership wanted nothing to do with them. So I mean, that's not uncommon, especially nowadays. It's just part of it could be fear, part of it could just be they are friendly and collaborate with the bosses. there is a large wave in the labor movement that view the boss as they view it like they're on the same team as the boss and they all have the same, goals in mind, but we all know that's idealist at best.
Yeah, also about the Knights of Labor, their ideal society was basically worker collectives or cooperatives. They had like an idea of transforming the economy into like an industrial cooperative type situation. So it was very, very much influenced by the petty bourgeois in the way that they approached labor issues. Oh, and another thing is that they were also, not that this is surprising given the historical context of the Knights of Labor, but they did not organize black workers or any other type of workers.
Would that mean they are anarcho-syndicalists?
I definitely related for sure. I mean, this is also the Marx is not has not basically convinced a large portion of people. This is very much a time period where there's like Fabian socialists and people who might be otherwise honest working class people, but who Marxism has not become the dominant ideological trend of the working class.
Thank you.
So when we had this class on Saturday, we had let everyone know that there were going to be May Day celebrations coming up. And oh yeah, and first, an interesting, well, not it's sad more than interesting, but May Day happened in Chicago. It is a holiday that was created in the American labor movement, but it is not celebrated all that much in this country. But everywhere else in the world, it's a pretty big holiday. And we see here in 2018 in Pakistan that they are carrying banners that talk about in the memory of Chicago martyrs. But here, even the major unions do not really celebrate May Day apart from locals within the unions. But they'll celebrate Labor Day. And when we had talked about before a day of revolt, there was a frustration, and it's very similar today, that the workers had become frustrated with how some of the labor leaders had become very close to the politicians. And there was an element of class collaborationism, and they were fed up with it. There were laws, like we had discussed earlier, that were passed that were full of loopholes. And so they eventually wanted to have not a day of rest, like they were saying, but a day of revolt. They were tired of the movement and the struggle becoming sterile and without a real militant working class spirit. And unfortunately today, May Day is not celebrated all that much. But it's up to us. And I think we all saw so the brothers and sisters and others who are close to this organization who went out to participate in rallies and marches to help rebuild that involvement of the working class in May Day. And we'll go through some of the pictures that we have from the WFTU on this as well.
Do you want to go through the slides that showed the events that took place, or do you want to just go right to what the pictures from WFTU?
Yeah, we'll go through what we had been involved with. Oh, I forgot about this. Okay, so this is the statement that WFTU put out about May Day, and I think there's a couple slides of this. So we'll go through this, and then we'll go through where we all had went for May Day. And so this says the World Federation of Trade Unions, the militant, class-oriented voice representing 105 million workers who live, work, and struggle in 133 countries of the 5 continents, honors the 137th anniversary of the struggle of workers in Chicago in 1886 that constituted a lasting milestone of the working class and a bright beacon for the struggles of today and tomorrow for stable work with rights, Social Security, free public and universal health and education, dignified life. Nowadays, the crisis of capitalism is deepening in the length and breadth of the globe, resulting in open violation of democratic and trade union rights, the deterioration of working and living conditions, and the dramatic widening of social inequities, poverty, and exploitation. The big capital and its political representatives were using the pretext of the capitalist crisis of all kinds to attack even the most fundamental democratic and trade union rights, like the right to strike, to demonstrate, and to organize. They do whatever they can to transfer the consequences of the crisis to the shoulders of the working class, the pensioners, the farmers, and the poorer part of the self-employed people. We fight to stop the economic wars and sanctions as a means of promotion of foreign and imperialist interests in sovereign and independent countries. We demand an immediate end to the criminal embargoes against socialist Cuba and the continuous crime against the Palestinian people. Our most powerful weapons are internationalism and solidarity. No worker must feel alone. The WFTU, on the occasion of 2023 International Workers' Day, conveys its warm, internationalist, militant, and class greetings to all struggling workers and to all militant trade unions that tirelessly and decisively conduct the daily fight for dignity, for the satisfaction of contemporary need of the working class and the popular strata. We intensify our common actions in every sector, in every country, in every continent, for the emancipation of the working class, to meet our own class interests and needs, against the root cause of poverty, misery, wars, refugees, to build a just, human-centered society with dignified living and working conditions for every human being, a society free of the capitalist barbarity and man-by-man exploitation. We call upon all the affiliates and friends of the WFTU to honor the International Workers' Day under the slogans and banners of the WFTU. Internationalist solidarity, the weapon of the working class. We refuse to pay for the crisis. Stop imperialist blockades and economic wars. And so for
Time is
New York,
9:50.
thank you. For New York City, we were involved with the National Writers Union at Washington Square Park. And then there was the May Day Workers' Rights or Moral Rights rally at Union Square Park. And in New Jersey, I'm not sure if this one was actually attended. But then for DC, I know that there were some people who attended, which was at Malcolm X Park. In Minnesota, there was the May Day March for immigrant and workers' rights, which was in part organized with the SEIU. And then there's the teachers union down there at the bottom in the OPEIU. And then for Missouri, there was the May Day rally, which was in Kansas City, Missouri. For Oregon, there was the May Day rally at forgetting what town this was in.
I believe that was Eugene.
Okay. And so then there was the other May Day rally, which was at the Capitol in Salem. And I think I don't know if there was a union involved in the organizing of that one. Can't read that real well. But for most of the rallies that were attended, they were in some shape or form organized in collaboration with unions. And then for California, there were two. One that was in Los Angeles, and this was the one organized with the SEIU Local 99. But there was also the teachers union there that was involved. I think that one, Education Workers United. And I think there was another one too. I think there was a few educator unions involved in this one. And this one was a march from 11th and Broadway to the City Hall. And then the other one in San Francisco was organized, was held at the ILWU Local 10 Hall. And I don't know if there was a march involved in that one. But you know that we had people attend that one. And I think that was it for the rallies we attended. But so then this is also this is the photos from the WFTU of how May Day was celebrated around the world, but this one is in these are from Italy, and now it's in Greece. It's a much bigger deal outside of the US for May Day. And so there's thousands of people who show up.
Just wanted to say, as a report back from the Minneapolis May Day marches, one of the SEIU union people actually had a WFTU flag in the march. So I was actually quite happy to see that.
Yeah, it's definitely very encouraging to see a lot of different locals around the country wanting to affiliate with the WFTU, because and we mentioned this to our international contacts that the CIO helped form the WFTU. It's unfortunate that it would not be able to, that the AFL-CIO would not be affiliated to WFTU, but there was a large, there, I mean, there was a presence of the CIO in the formation of the WFTU. And there was a campaign that was held in the CIO to help rebuild the Soviet Union at the end of World War II.
Yeah, do do I suppose like in the States, are there not a lot of unions or maybe members in unions that want to affiliate with WFTU because of their more like militant language and things like that? Because I know I don't know, I just didn't know if that was an issue or if there is like a point of like contention with that with some unions in the States.
So for, for like my understanding of the way that the labor leadership, how it is composed, and what influences there are on it. I would say that it can be kind of trade specific on which unions would want to affiliate with the WFTU. Especially if there's a greater degree of migrant workers or immigrants within the union, because they bring with them their own exposure to the WFTU in their country. And they're also not, they don't come from the same history or experience of the suppression of class-oriented trade unionism. But for those in the unions today, like under the AFL-CIO, I would say that for the most part, many people don't even know about the WFTU. Which is, I mean, it's the same. It's disappointing, just like how many don't celebrate May Day. So there's an educational component to even just getting people aware of that. I don't know if I adequately answered your question, but
Yeah, I was gonna say most trade unionists I've talked to, they've never heard of the WFTU. Never mind that the AFL apparently has its own international kind of like organizations. They've never heard of this thing. It's all really just regional, their own craft. So, but yeah.
To answer your question, I did not go to the one in New Jersey. I did go to one near me, which did not have a union presence at all. Even though there's a big building trades council building right down the road, essentially. I mean, it's literally walking distance, and they didn't even have representatives from there. So whoever, or, the people who organized it, they did not have labor in mind when they organized it.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on some of these WFTU events. There was a lot of different there's a lot of different scenarios going on. There was a couple different things in Greece, for instance. One was a memorial at the There was a WFT monument in Greece, and there was a memorial there. Also, the All Workers Militant Front, which is the English translation for their union, PAME in Greece. They held a rally in solidarity with the French workers who've been out on massive general strikes throughout the last year or so. And there was a large contingent of the CGT that was out there with them. In Italy, their May Day rallies and marches were gearing up towards, they have a general strike that they announced for the end of, I believe it will be May 26th, they'll be going out on strike. But those are just a couple of examples of how widely varying the May Day marches and strikes and actions were. Thank you.
I want to remind everybody, we were all together in 1945. After the war, we were still together, anti-fascist unity, and we formed the World Federation of Trade Unions, and the AFL-CIO was a member of that, and so is in England the TUC, the Trade Union Congress, which is their equivalent to the AFL-CIO. We were all part of one union movement. The US and England divided it over the issue of anti-communism. So they went from anti-fascism, the Allies, to actually with Truman, they went on the side of supporting fascism. Remember, there was a movement in Greece to overthrow the monarchy at this time in 47, 48. And the trade union movement was split right down the middle between those that supported the World Federation
60
Trade
seconds.
Union. So that we did have one thing, and it was divided. In fact, they went out of their way, the West went out of their way to set up another group called the International Federation of Independent Trade Unions, which was basically a anti-World Federation of Trade Unions, WFTU movement. And they split like the ultra left, they split everything we do. So it's not just the ultra left, it's also the ultra right. You notice that the ultras are always on the same side, whether they call themselves left or right. The aim was to destroy unity in something. Thank you.
Yeah. It's like I've been saying, it's disappointing that this isn't a holiday that is celebrated here as much as it is elsewhere in the world, but we're doing our part in making sure that it is something that is regains its spirit that the rest of the world has been continuing on. And that's the whole goal and mission of Lul, to reignite the militancy in the trade union movement here. And so these are links to our social media so that you can see all of the news and all the articles that we share and put out. And you can find the full article, the full statement from the WFTU on Labor United, is it Lul? Is it on lul.us?
It's labortoday.lul.us.
Okay. So it's on Labor Today. And I know that the time is already now 10:06, so I'll just wrap it up there. And we can, this was written during the fight for the 8-hour day.
Yes.
We mean to make things over.